Hey guys, welcome back to our podcast.
This is the A&E, Andy and Eliza podcast, where we talk about aesthetics. It's also a really funny name because aesthetics starts with an A and an E, so if you didn't get it, it's actually really funny. It's like a double entendre, so yeah.
Very, very insightful.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So we wanted to start today's podcast by discussing one of our favorite quotes about aesthetics and aesthetic performance.
Yeah, this quote is by Ole Thyssen, and it reads, "In aesthetic communication, the sender tries to evoke and control not just the actual focus of the receiver, but also his way of perceiving. His mood, which is not directed towards concrete objects as feelings for, but has to do with his general sensibility, his way of opening himself to the world, and himself, which we may call attunement. On the basis of the sensuous experience of communication, an imaginary world is created in which attunes the receiver for when, for example, he is shopping in a supermarket listening to the soft music that, it is hoped, will stimulate his desire to buy. In the same move in which the sender evokes a certain attunement, he can also attempt to transform the general mood of the receiver to a more concrete feeling for a specific object. This is why commercials present us with scenes of appealing and erotic leisure activities, indifferent to whether the product being advertised is a soft drink, a chocolate bar, or a shampoo. Of course, this trick must accept an extensive quota of failure."
Wow, that quote is sure a mouthful. Let's try to break that down. Thyssen is trying to decipher the process of aesthetic communication as we see it manifest in daily life and conversation. Essentially here, he's trying to suggest that when we interact with others, we're subconsciously generating a kind of theater of performance to control other people's perception of us. We become like an actor that's trying to use our aesthetic forms of communication to convince our audience that we are whatever we want them to believe that we are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he's suggesting advertisements try to capitalize on so many senses to make us feel inclined to buy or believe something. But not only do advertisements do that, we do it ourselves, and so do celebrities. I think public figures take a lot of care in forming aesthetic communication because part of their brand is what people think about them personally. So I feel like celebrities choose deliberately what they show and what they don't.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely easy to use celebrities as examples because the average person, I'd say especially in America, is inclined to look up to famous people as their major examples of what we deem as aesthetically pleasing or acceptable in society. The way that people present themselves is often carefully crafted, similarly to the way that advertisers try to carefully shape their brands in order to appeal to the largest number of consumers, as Thyssen was trying to say in his quote.
And Thyssen's example of social interaction and market advertising is really similar to how celebrities try hard not to break the status quo and be the most relatable that they can to their audience. But it becomes really, really difficult when you're a queer person because I feel like you're not representing your most authentic self. You're almost representing a shell of yourself. Like you're trying to fit in a square box when you're a circle. I can think of a couple celebrities who completely changed their brands after coming out.
Yeah, I have a bunch of celebrities that come to mind when you mention that. I think coming out itself it's like a process that's become rooted in performance, like through communication, like we're talking about, and like Thyssen's describing. Many queer people, whether they want to share their gender identity or their sexual orientation with the world, they've taken this action of sharing and made it their own type of performance.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's related to the way that queer people often feel like they can't be their true selves in the first place, or that they think they will only be known for being queer. Like, that's their biggest fear. Yeah. Making the coming out process original and your own is really valuable to people in the LGBTQ plus community because they can shape the world's perception of them through the reveal.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to separate your queerness from who you are as a person because the two are obviously intrinsically intertwined. But when the world only sees you with the label of queer, it can be really difficult. Many LGBTQ people want to establish that they're coming out as queer, but not that anything's changed about them. Someone who I think did this really well is Lil Nas X because he completely merged his queerness into his music in a really unique way, even though his coming out itself was very casual. He chose to own being gay after coming out rather than pretending as anything had changed. So he was able to integrate his queer identity into what he was putting out into the world and with his art.
I remember when he tweeted something along the lines of, I don't care what you guys think of me, but this is who I am. It wasn't some like grand performance or a really lengthy social media post with a very heartfelt caption, but his coming out made an impact on the way people viewed him because he told them it was something that did not define him. He could still be a queer man making music about his experiences, but queer is not the only part of his identity. He's more than that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it's fascinating to compare the experiences of someone who's in control of their performance of coming out, like Lil Nas, to someone like Nicki Tutorials, who was kind of forced out of the closet. She made a single video addressing it and then never really talked about it again. Even though she is somebody that the queer community looks up to and being a success story for coming out, she didn't fold her queer identity into her content necessarily after she did come out. She still had some control in the process of sharing her identity, but she admitted that this was not something that she felt was important to share with her audience had somebody not blackmailed her into doing it. So for Nicki, she was not able to, quote, control the actual focus of the receiver, his way of perceiving, his mood, etc., as Thyssen suggests we should be able to do in communication with others.
And I feel like even though Nicki wasn't able to like fully fold her identity into her content, like that was never what her content was about.
Yes.
And that kind of makes a little bit of a difference between her and Lil Nas X's stuff, because Lil Nas X has really, really tried a lot to make sure that his identity is seen through his music, because he wants people to be able to identify with his music because it's queer. And even then, I feel like sometimes there's some accidental aesthetic communication, like people who are not gay or have not stated they're gay have been like claimed by the LGBT plus community. One I can think of is Hozier. He's not gay, he's never claimed to be so, but the subjects of his songs, particularly the religious trauma he explores, have caused a lot of the LGBTQ plus community to identify with his music. If we go back to like Thyssen's analogy of the supermarket, Hozier was not marketing his cereal box to be picked up by someone in the LGBT community. That was not the consumer base he particularly wanted, but that's really what he got.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely true. But one thing I think is different is that Hozier has really no experience with being publicly queer. So things definitely are different from him in the sense that being queer is often associated with a more difficult beauty rather than an easy beauty, meaning that the general public generally sees queerness as something more complex and at times even bad or dangerous, as opposed to how they view heterosexual love.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a lot to be said about the choice to keep something so vitally a part of you and your experience growing up a secret, like how Chloe Cooper Jones writes, beauty is what we're told is beautiful and what we're told becomes the truth in her memoir, Easy Beauty. Because when queer kids are constantly told something about them is evil, I can understand why these kids, when they become celebrities, would want to hide that side of themselves. It can even be damaging to their brand as a famous person to come out as queer because of the negative associations our society has about queer people.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. I mean, one really recent example I would think that relates to what you were just saying would be when Dylan Mulvaney became the spokesperson for the beer brand Bud Light, and the largely conservative consumer base of Bud Light began protesting by destroying cans and just protesting the brand in general and posting about it on social media. So just by Bud Light selecting a trans person to be a part of their advertising, thousands of people decided to forever swear off the brand. I can't imagine anyone feeling comfortable coming out in a world where Dylan gets this type of hate for just existing, but that's why it's such a vital process for queer people to be in control of their coming out. But I do want to pose you a question. How do you think queer people can control the perception of others by just coming out?
I think it's difficult because if we're talking about public figures like we have been, it's really hard because from a like crisis communication standpoint, like what happened with Nicki Tutorials or what happened with Rebel Wilson, they had the idea is you must control the narrative. Yeah. And I feel like even though they're quote unquote controlling the narrative, they're not actually being given time to come out on their own terms and their own time. It feels like they just want to get it out there before someone else takes the words right out of their mouth. Yeah. And it's, it's like any aesthetic performance. It really, really depends on the person. And it depends on what they want the people around them to feel, whether or not you want it to be more of a joke or more serious, or, you know, come out to one person at a time or a large group. And I don't know, it's really hard being a public figure and knowing that eventually you might have to do this, or you might not get to come out on your own terms, like Kit Connor or Noah Schnapp, where people were just being like, I know you're gay.
Yeah, and they're literally like a 12-year-old child. It's like, yeah, why are you doing this? Why are you forcing this identity on them? Even if it's true, it's just not giving them the time and the space that any other queer person may be able to get. But again, like, something that we were talking about is that being queer is just seen as like a dirty little secret, and like other people can feel good about outing somebody else and like stealing that performance from them because being queer is seen as like a negative thing. And so it's just easy to be like, oh, that person's queer, and that's like a fun little thing for you to do, or like to speculate about it even when it's, you know, really none of your business.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult situation to navigate, and I feel like not only does it happen to celebrities, it happens to real people too.
For sure.
And we'd love to know your guys' opinion.
Yeah, I would love to know everybody in the comments opinions, and let you
This was Andy and Eliza with the
Andy and Eliza A&E podcast. Thank you guys for listening, and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Have a great day or night.
Thank you.